years of marriage, you could fill several large books with what I've learned through Beth about myself, about God, and about life. From lessons about the lifelong struggle with self-centeredness to the value of a gesture of kindness, like not leaving running clothes hanging in the bedroom, to learning to appreciate having dead flowers hanging upside down around the house, to sending thank you notes. I don't remember them being part of my life before marriage. I don't remember writing them after birthdays or Christmases or when someone sent a pair of hand-knit slippers. Now, don't get me wrong, it's a wonderful thing, and I think the Apostle Paul would have been really impressed by Beth's commitment to it. And the last portion in his letter to followers of Jesus in Philippi is his version of a thank you note. Although there's a lot more to it than their equivalent of grabbing a card off the shelf at a CVS or picking an e-card from dayspring.com. As usual, there's a lot to be learned from Paul, starting with his first words from the portion we're in. How grateful I am. Now that's an amazing statement. When you realize or remember, Paul did not write that while lying on a sofa, trying to fight off a nap while keeping an eye on football with a belly full after a Thanksgiving feast. No, he was under house arrest, chained to a Roman soldier, and facing the very real possibility of execution. The years had left his body wounded and deformed. His resume included beatings with rods, sticks, and whips, and being pelted with rocks. He had gone through extended stretches of hunger and thirst. He'd been shipwrecked. He faced ongoing public slander. Yet he wrote, "How grateful I am and how I praise the Lord." Now, Paul was not a masochist. He was not insensitive to pain and struggles. He didn't minimize the ugly realities that people face for following Jesus or for living in a broken, sin-stained world. There's a crucial phrase in the portion we're in today. Let's see if you can spot it. Paul wrote, "The Lord has made me very grateful that at last you have thought about me once again." Well, actually, you were thinking about me all along, but you didn't have any chance to show it. I'm not complaining about having too little. I've learned to be satisfied with whatever I have. I know what it is to be poor or to have plenty. And I have lived under all kinds of conditions. I know what it means to be full or to be hungry, to have too much or too little. Christ gives me strength to face anything. So, did you notice the crucial phrase? I think it's, "I have learned." Paul did not say, "Well, one morning I woke up, I grabbed a cup of coffee, and all of a sudden, in the middle of my quiet time, I was content. I was satisfied." No, he had learned. He had learned on shipwrecked boats, on long, hard walks on deserted roads. He had learned while regaining consciousness after being beaten. He learned while listening to his stomach growl. During all of that, Paul learned to be satisfied. Many other versions use the word content. The old King James has it, "I am instructed." So it's like Paul was saying, "Oh man, I learned the lesson, but school isn't out yet." And you can see the key lesson he learned in the next line he wrote. One that is well known but often misunderstood. He said, "I can do all things through Christ, who strengthens me." Many people stretch that verse beyond what it was intended to get across. They emphasize the first part, or don't even acknowledge the second part, leaving it as, "I can do all things." And some have even taken that to support what has come to be known as name it and claim it faith, and subtle or overt forms of the prosperity gospel. A New York Times reporter did a story on one of the most popular pastors in North America who often misuses that verse. And the reporter's observation was, if not for the religious references, his sermons could be secular motivational speeches. Now, there isn't anything automatically wrong with being a motivator. A lot of followers of Jesus would do well to develop a deeper understanding of what he wants to see them become. But when Paul wrote, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, he was not saying that if I really want to be an LA Laker, all I need to do is believe it can happen. No, Paul was saying one of two things. He was either saying we can do all the things God has for us to do through the strength he gives, or we can do all kinds of things through Jesus. These two Bible versions of the verse get close to what Paul was trying to get across. Whatever I have, wherever I am, I can make it through anything in the one who makes me who I am. And Christ gives me the strength to face anything. Now, Paul had come to know Jesus intimately, and because of him, Paul was willing to face anything, and that grew as he continued to reflect on things he had been through. I can't tell you if you'll ever be taken to the kind of extreme tests of faith Paul was, but have you ever been going through something, and in the middle of it, you don't think you're going to make it? Maybe the darkness couldn't have been any darker. Or the pain couldn't have been any more intense. Or the loneliness couldn't have crushed your heart any more than it was. Maybe you're close to that right now. If you've had times like that, and now stand on the other side, is there a lingering sense of amazement that you made it through? Do you still have this sense that if it had not been for God, you would not be here? Even if during it you wondered where in the world God was. That's what Paul was talking about when he said Jesus gave him strength to face anything. And he prayed passionately for followers of Jesus in Philippi to find the same strength. And upon finding that strength, to be content, whatever the circumstances. Now, that touches on one of the greatest ironies of our day. Our culture is chronically discontent. Even though we're surrounded by all kinds of gadgets and gimmicks and plans and promotions promising to make us content. The thing is, each thing pleads with us to try it, with the assurance that it will make us content. Until we hear about the next thing that's designed to convince us we're not really content, but as soon as we have their thing, then we will be. See, we have this barrage of powerful, multi-sensory messages that goes all out to convince us we cannot be fully content unless we get their thing, from new soap to a new SUV. In a culture that has so many products that are supposed to bring contentment, a lot of people are dangerously discontent. It's been 2,000 years since Paul wrote what we're studying, but rather than being outdated or irrelevant, it seems like something we would all do well to learn. Again, Paul wrote, I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. And he continued, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or living in want. And then he added the line about doing all those kinds of things through the strength that comes from Jesus. And there's another verse that's often misunderstood and even misused a few lines later. Paul wrote, My God will meet all your needs according to his glorious riches in Christ Jesus. When I was a baby Christian in my 20s, one of the songs our young adults group sang included that line. My God shall provide all my needs according to his riches in glory. He'll give his angels charge over me. Jehovah Jireh cares for me, for me, for me. I don't know if you know it. I don't know if you can even recognize it the way I almost sang it there. But I remember being really puzzled by that song. I brought a lot of questions to that young adults group, and a lot of them had to do with that song and with Philippians 4:19. Especially as I began hearing about things like some parents the church was ministering to who seemed like real Christians, but their kids often went hungry, as in sometimes not even a meal a day. And then I heard about some mothers whose husbands had left them and weren't paying a penny to help. So the heat was going to be turned off in the dead of winter, and there hadn't been enough money raised to help all the mothers. And questions about things like that combined with questions I had carried from my previous job with the Canadian Cancer Society, where there were amazing stories of healing, but there were, well, other stories. Hard stories. Stories that fed questions I had about a patch a guy wore, borrowing the old Coke slogan to claim things go better with Jesus. I began to realize some things with Jesus didn't go better. Because I kept finding myself caring about things and people I had never cared about before. And that hurts often and a lot. And then I began to find books that said Mark, the writer of the book in the Bible, was dragged to his death. James was clubbed to death. Peter, Philip, and Andrew were crucified. Thomas was speared to death. Luke was hung by the neck. Stephen was stoned to death. And Paul and Matthew were beheaded. So I began to realize Paul wasn't exactly talking about winning the lottery when he wrote, "My God will meet all your needs." Now, I do believe Paul was praying God would provide the Philippians with things like food and water and strength, often beyond anything they could have dreamed. God's done that sort of thing all through history. And time after time, the Bible calls us to pray for things like that. I read about a lady who was a cleaner in some government buildings in Santa Ana. And one day she accidentally threw her wallet out with the wrappings from her lunch, including her credit cards and $900 cash. She'd been saving for a trip to see her family in Thailand. She prayed and asked God for help. Well, a homeless man found the wallet in a dumpster and turned it into someone who works in the building. And it was returned to the lady. Not a thing was missing. God's done that sort of thing all throughout history. But that does not mean he has to do it every time. It doesn't mean he will do it every time. It doesn't mean he won't do it unless or until the right amount of people pray he does. The Bible makes it clear we are supposed to pray that cancers disappear, and relationships are healed, and raises come through, and jobs get found, and lost wallets turn up. But sometimes they don't. Paul knew that as well as anyone. And that's why he wrote, "I know how to live on almost nothing, or with everything. I've learned the secret of living in every situation, whether it's with a full stomach or empty, with plenty or with little." And Paul had come to see none of that ever caught God by surprise. To the contrary, Paul kept learning how it somehow all fit into God's eternal design. And in a lecture to some of the top philosophers of the day, Paul said, "From one man God made every nation of men, that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he determined the times set for them and the exact places where they should live." God did this so that men would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him. though he's not far from each one of us. Seek him and reach out for him. Once someone does, this Old Testament promise becomes an unshakable reality. The Lord your God will be the one who keeps on walking with you. He won't leave you or abandon you, even when it doesn't feel like he's there, especially when it doesn't feel like he's there. That's what Paul was getting at when he asked and then answered, can anything separate us from the love of Christ? Well, there's the deepest need. Can trouble, suffering, hard times, hunger, nakedness, or danger and death? It's exactly as the scriptures say, Paul said, for you we face death all day long. We're like sheep on the way to be butchered. Yet, in everything, we have won more than a victory because of Christ who loves us. And as Paul wrapped up this letter, he overflowed with gratitude and amazement and humility, and for how God had shown that love for him through the kindness of his fellow believers in Philippi. They had sent him gifts along his journey, and even as he sat in jail. I think we should picture him kind of smiling and shaking his head in wonder as he thought about all they did for him. And then he wrote, I want you to receive a reward for your kindness. As with many verses that mention anything like a reward, many preachers and writers stretch that one to a dangerous degree, and they try to turn God into kind of a guaranteed slot machine. If you put the right money in and pull the lever the right way, you can count on the right money back out. But that's not the kind of return or reward Paul had in mind. He told the Philippians their gifts were a fragrant offering, a sacrifice acceptable and pleasing to God. And those words came from the cherished Jewish scriptures and their system of sacrifices, offerings of produce and animals to show their gratitude to God and their dependence on him. And God the Father loves to receive gifts of thanksgiving from his children more than any of us parents can, although most parents can kind of relate. I mean, Beth and I have what she calls keep forever boxes for each daughter, full of all kinds of things they've made since they were first able to scribble with a crayon on a piece of paper or squeeze a shape out of a little blob of clay. There is so much mutual joy when that kind of gift is given. Children are so excited about what they've done, and they eagerly watch their parents' faces. And parents smile and hold whatever it is to their chest, even if it's the seventh rock with googly eyes glued on this week. It's this beautiful moment of mutual joy for very distinct yet very real reasons. And think of that and look again at what Paul told the Philippians. Your generosity is like a lovely fragrance, a sacrifice that pleases the very heart of God. Think of that. Think about it spoken to you, not to them. Your generosity is like a lovely fragrance, a sacrifice that pleases the very heart of God. And grab onto that and carry it to one more verse. We're going to close with it. And I want you to be thinking about what it could look like for you, lived out this week, maybe even today. Make sure you don't take things for granted and go slack in working for the common good. Working for the common good. Share what you have with others. God takes particular pleasure in acts of worship, a different kind of sacrifice. that take place in kitchens and workplaces and on the streets.